Thank you very much, Saida ji, and for giving me this opportunity. And it was so good to listen to you, as well as John Korean, my dear friend, and Mr. Anil Noria. In fact, uh, when Saida ji asked me to speak, I was hesitant because I felt that I would not be an expert on Maulana Azad, but she persuaded me and she said that you talk what you are doing, and that would be in sync with what perhaps the educationist that Maulana Azad was. I hazarded to say yes to it. And I did read the book which Mr. Anil Noria talked about, which gave me a glimpse of Maulana Azad, which is a collection of articles. And what struck me is what he had mentioned, what John had mentioned about his imagination of India. That struck me so much. So I would be talking a little about that, and also about the centrality of education that Maulana Azad had for his imagination of India. In fact, I thought I have not seen, I'm in touch with some of the nationalist leaders, but I found Maulana Azad emphasis on education to be not just impressive, but so inspiring. And I think many of us, people like me who've been working on education have little knowledge of it, and I feel that all of us must know about it. Because education has not become a center of India's democracy the way Maulana Azad had located education as a centrality of India's democracy. The kinds of statements he made, is something that resonates with many of us who are talking about it. But he talked about it about 80 years ago, and that is what, and still an unfinished agenda. And I would think that we should read Maulana Azad just to look at how he emphasized and education as a right to equality, how education brings social justice, how education is for universality, how education is a link uh, from, as Saida Hamidji has said, from your ward to the city to a global citizen. Without education, nothing could be achieved at all. And I think that's so important. And I do wish that education becomes a centrality of India's democracy the way Maulana Azad visualized it. In fact, he even said that during and after, soon after independence, that if there was anything that was important for nation building, it should be education. In fact, you should even give up on other aspects of development, and it has to be a priority for education. I have not looked at the exact quotations, but then it was so inspiring when I read that you can defer every other item of every other aspect of construction, every other aspect of nation building. Without education, there is no nation building. He took very categorical stance on that. And he said that we have been victims of the British colonial system and its system of education, which was non-national. It was not for national interest at all. And he talked about how the pioneers of freedom movement, in fact, discussed education and gave importance to education. Here, I think it is important also to look at his way in which he defines schools. That a good school is a national asset. I have not seen contemporary politicians talking about schools as a national asset at all. And that it is, and from the way he said, it seemed that schools had a huge role to play in transforming the societies in which it is embedded in. That schools are not mirror images of the society, but schools change society. That they're not just reflection of existing fissures, but they are uh, uh, assets and institutions for democracy, for inclusiveness, for equality, for justice. And again, internationalism that he talked about was very, very important. I think when you talk about being a good citizen, it is first of all being a citizen of India, but again, a citizen of a global community. The idea of humanist values, the idea of humanness takes priority. And it is in this sense that when we talk about the Nayi Taleem or Buniyaadi education, you find that it is a way in which one could resolve varieties of hierarchies and conflicts in the country. And of course, in India, the major conflict is the caste hierarchy, the Brahminical ideology, and the caste conflict. You know, that there is a separation of work from intellectual activity. And that this separation itself brings inherently the hierarchy between those who use their hand and those who use their mind. This is the basic disharmony. And if you need to build harmonious society, you will have to have everybody learning to use the hand, the mind, as well as the spirit. You know, I think that's a beautiful formulation to break the kind of hierarchy that there is. So you have one section which is totally deprived uh, and told that you're not there for intellectual activity. There is another section which is also deprived in a way, saying that you're not there for using your hands. So the way to resolve it has been, or the way to resolve it is to bring harmony and a harmonious education system where you use your mind, where you use your hand, but not just use your mind and hand, but do it with the heart, do it with the spirit, with a sense of spirituality, which emphasizes again on humanness. And somewhere I think that kind of harmony has to be in society, and harmony has to be in your own self as an individual. And you must learn to do both work at hand. Because, you know, we have seen how this in the past hierarchical society, some just did not work with their hand. And that seemed to be superior to the other kinds of communities. So I think this is very, very important to learn. So having said this, let me go to the current situation of COVID that there is, and how I would relate it to the kind of fissures that there is, and how I would learn from, or the country should learn from Maulana Azad to look at the current challenges in India and transcend it. First of all, we all know that the 2.5 years of school closure, had affected boys and especially girls. And they're back into the labor market. Child marriage has increased. There has been sexual abuse and violence on children. There has been a loss of mobility and freedom, a hunger, loss of livelihood, and also, more importantly, the reversal of gains made in the last decade or so. Whatever its deficiencies, I think there has been a phenomenal growth in access to education, and that more and more poor have begun to see the importance of education. And in fact, they did much more than the government did. They knew that there were bad schools. They knew that the teachers were not working well. They knew that nothing was happening. But then they expressed their faith in the education system, made enormous sacrifices, and sent their children to school. This is also true about, as John would say, about how girls have done well in Muslim communities, but at the same time in other communities also. The rate at which the girls accessed education was far, far more than the rate at which boys had accessed education. So there has been a break, a trend. But then the COVID times had reversed the gains. Many of the girls who aspired for higher education could no longer do that. Even girls who passed 8th class were looking forward to a 9th, 10th, and then perhaps college. They couldn't carry forward their dream for education. Neither did the boys do that. So in a way, there was uncertainty about future, there was anxiety, and many of the children faced depression during this time. What would one have expected the state to do? And in this kind of a scenario, there was no noise at all from the state in the last 2 years when the schools closed. Children were just not on the radar. The state could easily have assigned responsibilities to Gram Panchayats. In fact, if Maulana Azad was the education minister now, how would he have behaved in this kind of a pandemic? Would he have allowed schools to be closed? Would he have allowed a ceiling of education completely? Would he have allowed children to go into child labor? Would he have allowed children to be oppressed and exploited? Would he have allowed child marriages? And in the name of saying that they're poor, it's not practical, we can't do anything and apologize. I think this is where one finds that there was a strong lacking of leadership in education. And that vacuum one could easily see when one read how Maulana Azad really conceptualized education for the country. At the time of freedom, it's not that India was in a better position than what it is now. There was a refugee population. There was disharmony. There was Hindu-Muslim writing everywhere. There, there was suspicion everywhere. And there was no food. There was hunger, systemic hunger. We had to borrow. Then there was no money because all the money that India had was taken away by the colonial masters. We were in deep, deep crisis, bigger crisis than what it is now during COVID times. And what would the language of Maulana be during this time? And I think that is what is inspirational. When I read speeches after speeches made during the advisory board of education meeting or the Sindhia meeting or wherever he went, he talked about imagining India. He didn't fall into the trap of deepening fissures, deepening communal hatred, and that was not the mood. The mood at that time was, how do you build a nation in spite of all this? In fact, how do you convert this disadvantage into an advantage? That language of education, that language of schooling, that language that when I read through, I will not repeat it because I think all of us should read it just to be touched by the huge crisis India went through at the time of independence and how positive our leadership was during that time. The constitutional values was emphasized by every leader. I think the word that Saidaji mentioned, the cohort of leaders, all of them spoke the same language. They didn't get bogged down about the fissures, but they they got out of it new imagination of the country, where you could be both nationalist as well as an internationalist. And that is where I think they thought that schools are important national assets. Here, look at the situation that we have found ourselves in, that instead of uh, raising unnecessary controversies about the issue of right to religion and hijab, uh, the discussion should have been entirely different. We should have said that, look, these girls have come back to school after 2 years. They've lost their education. How do we welcome them in school? How do we see that there is bridging of gap in learning? How do we give full support to these education children? Because let me tell you, even if these girls came back to school, it wouldn't have been easy. They must have exercised agency. They have already got caught in gender-based violence in their homes. So each girl's journey post-COVID to education, especially to 11th and 12th class, is a battle. They would not have automatically come. And would you not, as an education minister, would you not say that, how do I give support to these girls, instead of talking about the issue of religion and instead of talking about the issue of wearing a hijab or a burqa, is that right or is that wrong? Would they not have talked about what do I do with these girls and their continuance of education? I think there is a total moral bankruptcy that there is, and one will have to go back to Maulana Azad to find solutions to these issues, because he spoke so eloquently about religion. He was not anti-religion. Secularism did not mean anti-religion to all the freedom fighters. That came out so clearly in the articles but read. That being secular is being tolerant. Being secular is asking for harmony. Being secular is embracing everyone. And being secular is again talking about the thing that we talk, unity with diversity. That's become an empty slogan, but that's such a political, moral slogan. And I think we should emphasize on the politics of unity and diversity, because it is mouthed as if it was like some mantra without content and without politics, through which this has emerged. So I think we will have to say that we are not against religion. We are for religion, which is for the finest human values. That is what he was talking about. Finest moral values. All religions contain this, and we must respect all. I think that was very, very inspiring for me. He said, let us not go the path of Russian Revolution or Soviet Union. We are deeply embedded in the cultures, and our relation to our religions is something that we will have to celebrate and glorify. And that is the specificity of Indian culture. That every kind of faith, every kind of culture, every mode of life must be allowed to flourish and find its own salvation. So, in a way, it was so inspiring. In a way, it was so inspiring to read Maulana, and the way he resolved the issue of language. I will not go into the details because there's so many who are there after me. But he did, of course, realize the challenges of not having enough funds, not having enough infrastructure, not having teachers, but at the same time, he had faith in the community, he had faith in the system, that all this can be resolved with relentless activity and with relentless, work towards secular democracy, towards inclusiveness, towards equality, towards social justice. I think these values are embedded in every speech that he has made. So I would, I don't want to take any more this thing, but basically this is something that I've shared with others also. The current situation is something that hurts me personally also. That I am to, that if it has affected all of us personally, it has pushed us into an identity that we are not. We have to identify as a Hindu and not the kind of Hindu that we want to be. And sometimes, actually, I don't even want to be a Hindu. Why am I having to live with an imposed identity? Why can't we take on the identity that Maulana Azad talked about, being an Indian, being a global citizen? And I think we have to arrive at that position where we think of ourselves as nationalists, and that Hinduism is not nationalism, it is communalism. There is nothing like Hindu nationalism or Muslim nationalism. They're all communal. That we have to talk about Indianness, imagining a secular India, a democratic India, and perhaps deepen these ideas through schools. Because as Maulana said, schools are the national assets and the institutions that can bring about democracy and deepen democracy. Thank you very much for this.